International.
Red Radio.
This right here.
Powered by UBA, Africa's global bank.
Welcome to Africa and Everywhere Conversations with 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐚. I'm your host, 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐚 Elumelu, and this is where I talk about things that matter. So for today's episode, I'm excited to launch our first episode in our Conversations with 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐚 UNGA series. UNGA stands for the United Nations General Assembly, happening in New York this September. And for our first episode, we're coming to you live and direct from New York City. So I'm very excited to be joined by some truly influential women within the 𝐻ERS Holdings group to discuss with today. I'm aware that for some listeners, it might not yet be clear what exactly 𝐻ERS Holdings, or 𝐻EIGHT as it's commonly referred to internally, is, but I assure you we'll get to that. So I have Somachi Chris-Asoluka, the current CEO of the Elumelu Foundation, and Sola Yomi-Ajayi, who is the current CEO of United Bank for Africa International and the country CEO for UBA America. So we really have some trailblazer women with us today. And you guys are going to hear me refer to them as Somachi and Sola. Thank you both for agreeing to come on the episode, and especially as my first ever guest on our launch episode. I'm truly grateful, so thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here, 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐚. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, so as we start, I think it'd be helpful to provide some context to listeners. So I wanted to ask each of you, what is your role within your companies or within your organization? And also, what services do you provide to consumers, or what is it you're giving your stakeholders? So maybe, Somachi, we can start with you.
Thanks, 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐚, and well done. Sounds like a brilliant podcast already. So my name is Somachi Chris-Asoluka. I'm the CEO of the Elumelu Foundation. The Elumelu Foundation is a leading philanthropy empowering young African entrepreneurs from all 54 African countries. We're empowering these young entrepreneurs because we want to, one, improve job creation on the continent. Africa is the youngest continent by far, and we simply don't have all the jobs and economic opportunity that we need to ensure that we're economically empowering our young people. Second reason is we want to eradicate poverty. For too long, the African narrative has been defined by poverty. We believe that in our lifetime, we can create the wealth and prosperity that will birth the new narrative for the continent. And the third is that we want to engender inclusive economic empowerment. For too long, our women entrepreneurs and our women in Africa have been on the sidelines. We want to give them opportunity to start jobs for themselves, for others, to start businesses, scale businesses, and be more meaningfully engaged in economic productivity across all our countries. So for this reason, the foundation has been empowering young African entrepreneurs since 2010. In 2015, we launched our flagship program called the TEF Entrepreneurship Program. And through this program, we have identified 20,000 young entrepreneurs. We have disbursed $100 million to them in seed capital that is returnable. And in turn, these entrepreneurs have gone on to start businesses that have created 400,000 jobs and generated over $2.5 billion in collective revenue in only a few years. We're excited at what we've done so far, and we want to do even more for young African entrepreneurs.
Thank you. And on to you, Sola.
I'm Sola Yomi-Ajayi, the CEO for UBA International. I also double hat as a CEO for UBA America, which is where I'm based. So for us at UBA, we're present in 4 continents, Africa, which is our home continent, and where we also have presence across 20 African countries. We're headquartered in Lagos, Nigeria. So beyond Africa, we have presence in North America, we have presence in Europe, and we also have presence in the Middle East. Now, given the diverse presence that we have, our priority in UBA, our focus in UBA is to connect, Africa to the world from an economic perspective. So our franchise across 4 continents focuses on, one, enabling trade with Africa, trade within Africa, intra-Africa trade. We also focus on providing, economic empowerment through the banking solutions that will provide to key sectors of the economy. We are also facilitating the flow of investment capital as well as development capital to Africa. And we're doing this by supporting key sectors of the economy, such as the development community, in helping them get the required solutions to the last mile within the countries where we operate in UBA, leveraging both digital and, presence locations to reach the last mile, leveraging the various banking, products and platforms. We are also facilitating small and medium-sized businesses, helping them to scale up, helping them to achieve, economic independence, and also ensuring that as a banking institution, we are facilitating the achievement of sustainable development goals, which is really to eradicate poverty and economic integration in Africa.
Thank you so much, both of you, for explaining just briefly what it is you do within your groups. I like that you had already started to touch on the SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals. I know the United Nations is very big on, and that leads nicely onto the topic as for why we're here. So both companies are actually attending UNGA this year, the United Nations General Assembly. And I know both companies have a history in the city of New York. So I know TEF, Tony Elumelu Foundation, has been at UNGA twice before now, I believe, and this is the third attendance. Yeah. And obviously, UBA America is headquartered in New York, and this is actually the 40th year anniversary. So I wanted to try and build on that and hear from both of you more about each company's history in the city before we dive further. So I guess, Sola, maybe we'll come back to you first. Could you maybe explain to us the history of the bank in America, why it is a big deal that an African bank is operating in the United States, and what it means for customers?
So UBA has been operating in America since 1982. We actually started as a representative office in 1982. And then by 1984, we secured a banking license. So we have a federal banking charter issued by the Federal Reserve. We're regulated by the Office of the Comptroller of Currency. Incidentally, UBA happens to be the only African bank with a federal banking charter. The barrier to entry is actually very, very high. It's quite difficult to secure a banking license in the US, but even more difficult to sustain and hold on to it because the regulatory hurdles are very high. And so we feel quite proud. We feel privileged to be that African institution that is trailblazing, that is representing the African continent here in the US. And we're also quite privileged, that we're able to meet those regulatory standards and hurdles on an ongoing basis, without which we would not have been here for 40 years. And we believe this should also give comfort to our customer set across the world in terms of the high standards that we have set for ourselves at UBA, both from a compliance perspective, a regulatory perspective, a governance perspective, and that should give them comfort, as they determine whom to bank with. Now, back to the question of why are we here in the US? So for those of you who know about Africa, you would know that we do have a lot of natural resources in Africa. Sometime in the 60s, 70s, a lot of resources were developed, or should I say discovered, in Africa. In Nigeria, where we're headquartered, we have significant reserves of hydrocarbons, particularly oil and gas. And when we decided to expand beyond Africa or beyond Nigeria at the time, the US was our natural first port of call. And that's because given the hydrocarbons that we have in abundant resource in Nigeria, a lot of the companies that were participating in the industry from a prospecting as well as mining and development perspective were US companies, the likes of the Chevrons and the likes of the Mobils. So we followed the money, we followed the customers. Who are our customers? That's 1984 when we went to secure the banking license. How can we be closer to the seat of decision making? How can we facilitate the business better? And that's, how we started our foray to the US. But over and above the oil and gas sector, we've had a very, very close economic links with with the US, cutting across trade, cutting across infrastructure development, cutting across diplomacy, cutting across, development and, the whole economy of Africa. So, and that has driven UBA's foray into other parts of Africa and beyond Africa. So Nigeria and the 19 other countries where we have presence, there's a lot of trade going on with the rest of the world. There's a lot of capital goods. There's a lot of finished products being imported, raw materials being exported. The key countries that's been exported to or imported from have included historically the likes of the US, the UK, Asia. And that's what has driven our expansion beyond Africa to be able to help African businesses achieve their commercial objectives, to be able to facilitate trade. And one thing you should know is that the US dollar is the number one single most important currency in the world in terms of payments. That is a currency that is spent the most across the world for settlement of trade and business activities as the US dollars. New York is the home for clearing of the US dollars. Now, due to the perceived risks pertaining to Africa, a lot of the large multinational banks have, over the last 2 decades, deleveraged and de-risked and have moved out of Africa. So that has actually resulted in a vacuum with a lot of African institutions, banks and non-banks, being challenged in getting banking services, being challenged in getting much needed payment services to be able to clear payments in order to settle trades. And that's where UBA comes in, because we're based here in New York, which is the home country and headquarters for US dollar settlement. We're able to step in and provide that solution to African businesses and African financial institutions. So for us, it's really key. Our presence here in New York helps us to achieve our strategic goals from a business perspective, but also helps us to achieve our other goal of contributing, one, to the development of the African continent. Financial inclusion is very key for us at UBA, and through our presence here in the United States, we're able to facilitate financial inclusion, access to payment systems, access to trade solutions, and that we consider very, very key, and that's why we're here in the US.
This is Red Radio, powered by UBA, Africa's global bank.
Thank you so much. Before we go on to Somachi, I just wanted to say that's actually really interesting, because personally I'm interested in energy projects, infrastructure, power, oil and gas, all of that. And I don't think I'd ever really appreciated how that had an impact in why an institution such as UBA would have actually, wanted to expand to the US like you were talking about. And definitely it's not a small feat that they have been able to maintain their presence for over 40 years, like you said, meeting the regulation requirements. And so just from me, I wanted to say well done to the team, honestly, because that's no small feat. And it's nice hearing how the presence of UBA on the continent is trying to fill that vacuum and continue to improve the building of African development, but also financial inclusion for African businesses and clients when trying to trade with the world, obviously using the US dollar. So thank you for that explanation. And Somachi, over to you.
Thanks, Oge. And as you said, that's very interesting from Shola. At the Tony Elumelu Foundation, part of our mission is to give African entrepreneurs the visibility, the spotlight, and the platforming that they deserve. And so that's now why for 3 years in a row, we've attended UNGA and we've hosted events at UNGA. And so at the upcoming UNGA, we're also going to be hosting an event in close partnership with the World Food Programme that spotlights African entrepreneurs and shows their contributions and their commitments and their inputs and the work they've done in helping Africa achieve food security. So that's the reason why we go to UNGA every year, so that we can forge more meaningful partnerships to support additional entrepreneurs, so that we can raise the spotlight and visibility for young African entrepreneurs, so that the world knows the talent and the creativity and the grit and the resilience that's that lives on the continent. And then finally, so that we can let the world know what we're doing in terms of the work we've done in supporting these entrepreneurs and training 1.5 million of them in only a few years, and in seeing how they can key in to our vision of an empowered entrepreneurial class on the continent. I'm particularly excited for this year's UNGA because it appears to have a lot of development agencies in attendance this year. I think even more than last year, as the world begins to understand the importance of the convening power that UNGA holds. And so I'm excited at the conversations that will be held. I'm excited at the collaborations that we will brainstorm on and how to go bigger with our partnerships. I'm very excited at the event that we'll be co-hosting. So this one with the World Food Programme, a larger cocktail with the United Bank for Africa, that will convene very many heads of states and policymakers and business leaders and philanthropists, etc., and our entrepreneurs, 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐚 Foundation entrepreneurs, who will be in New York with us, who will be attending some of the meetings we're attending, speaking at some events, and just letting the world know that when you think entrepreneurship, you think Africa. You don't always have to think Silicon Valley. You can also think Lagos. You can also think Mombasa. You can think Accra. You don't have to think California all the time. And showing the world what they're made of and why we need more support and more platforming and more visibility and more funding and more investment for these young African entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much, Somachi. Definitely, I think it definitely is really exciting that TEF is coming to UNGA yet again, because we know obviously the impact of what TEF does, and we know the foundation is doing such a huge impact for entrepreneurs. But like you said, the rest of the world might not always know. So I'm guessing platforms like this are just so important to promote the work to the global stage. And like you said, even see how other partners perhaps might be interested in trying to support entrepreneurs as well. I think I just wanted to include even briefly that I know this year marks the 10th year anniversary of the launch of the Elumelu Foundation Entrepreneurship Program. So I'm sure it's just a really nice thing to be able to come to New York yet again and seeing what we can do more. You touched on how there's even meant to be a larger cocktail reception with UBA America when TEF arrived in New York as well. And I wanted to direct this question to the two of you. Besides this cocktail event, or maybe you can tell us more about it even, but how would you say both companies work together at times, or are there ever any synergies or overlap between the two? And sorry, before you actually do answer, I had just realized I don't think we explained how the two companies are even related. So maybe I can quickly touch on it and then anyone can add on. But both part of Hes Holdings Group, which is an investment holding company, and Elumelu Foundation is one of the subsidiaries within that, and then UBA is also part of that. But yes, so let me ask my question directed at either of you, whoever would want to answer first. What overlaps do the two companies have at times, or synergies, and what particularly would they be working together on at UNGA?
UBA is present in 20 African countries. And even though our work cuts across all 54 African countries, UBA is such a key partner for us in terms of distributing and disbursing our funding seamlessly. UBA has infrastructure, has the network, has the track record, has relationship, and has the in-depth contextualized country by country experience in how to make sure that these entrepreneurs get their funding in a transparent and a timely manner. And even after they receive the grant from us, UBA continues to support them in order to scale and expand and access additional capital in terms of loan, etc., from the bank or other financial institutions. So UBA continues to serve as that financial support base for entrepreneurs in receiving their grant from us, and then even in learning and growing and scaling and requiring more support. And I think also UBA has the global experience and the global visibility as well. UBA is the only African institution, financial institution in America. It's also present in UK, present in France. These are some countries where some of our development partners are based out of. And so when we're initiating partnerships with these development agencies, it's always nice to know that we have a bank, UBA, that's also present in that geography, and can be a part of these discussions and these partnerships and these collaborations. We've also partnered with several agencies and brought in UBA as well. For instance, our partnership with DEG, the German Development Agency, actually involves UBA. So it's a tripartite. And it's a tripartite that's helped us support 200 additional entrepreneurs across over 20 African countries. And UBA is also a part of that to help with their technical assistance, to help with their capacity building for these entrepreneurs, and giving these entrepreneurs additional support post going through the TF entrepreneurship program. So it's been fantastic having such a close relationship with the bank, enjoying such a close relationship with the bank where we're able to exchange expertise and knowledge and partners. You know, UBA also has a lot of MDO partners across the world. And when we say MDO, so that's multilateral embassy development organizations. And those really are the type of partners we're looking out for. And so UBA is also able to facilitate some introductions, just as we also at the 𝐂𝐨𝐻𝐿𝐿 Foundation are able to use our soft will and our goodwill and our soft power to influence some partnerships for the bank. So I'll let Sola come in to add how she thinks we also work together.
1, 2, 3, in the place to be.
Your home for much more music and lifestyle. Red Radio, powered by UBA, Africa's global bank.
Thank you so much. I think you've done a very, very beautiful introduction there, so I'll just add a bit more. So indeed, UBA is an investee company of Hess Holdings. We're a public company, and Hess Holdings is one of our co-investors. And we do have the same chairman. The chairman of UBA is the founder of the Elumelu Foundation. So we have that relationship. And we've been able to collaborate on several fronts. So whereas the foundation is very, very focused on, economic empowerment through entrepreneurship, UBA as a financial institution based on its size and the diversity of its operations and customer base, we're focused on poverty eradication, leveraging different platforms, financial inclusion, job creation, and different initiatives. But we have a UBA Foundation that focuses on education, it focuses on, strategic partnerships. We're also looking at empowerment, empowering from a poverty eradication perspective. And through those pillars, we collaborate with the Elumelu Foundation. So we're not doing a lot directly in the entrepreneurship space, but we're collaborating with Elumelu Foundation because we do have common goals and aspirations as far as the development of the continent is concerned. So through our foundation, UBA Foundation, we directly, having impactful initiatives in the education and environmental sectors. But then we also have strategic partnerships with various UN entities, the Elumelu Foundation, and all of that. So it's been a very, very great work relationship, even though both institutions are a relationship from an ownership perspective, but it actually transcends that because we're able to unlock value for each other. Like Somachi said, we're able to introduce potential partners to them. They're also able to open the doors for us from a business perspective. So it's actually been a win-win collaboration, and we're very, very proud of it. We want to see it develop some more. Now talking about UNGA, so we're both here in UNGA. New York is our base for UBA. We're welcoming the world to New York. We're welcoming the Elumelu Foundation and all our partners coming from across the world. It's a very auspicious year for us at UBA. UBA America is 40 years, and UBA Group as a whole is 75 years. So we are actually having an event whereby we are bringing together key partners from across the world, where we're hosting high-level networking on the sideline of UNGA, and also to celebrate our 40 years of operations in the US. And that's what Somachi referred to earlier on. So we're really looking forward to that opportunity to showcase what UBA and the foundation, both the UBA Foundation and Elumelu Foundation, have achieved over the last 10 to 40 years, 40 years of UBA, 10 years of the Tony Elumelu Entrepreneurship Program, and, also working together to create the future and discuss what the future is going to look like. And we're very, very excited about the impactful conversations that we're going to be having with our partners during the UNGA week.
Amazing. Thank you very much to both of you for your answers. It really sounds like this is going to be a very exciting time. So I implore everybody listening to watch out, keep following us, and just keeping up to date on what we'll be doing in New York at UNGA. Thank you both for your answers to my questions so far. I'm so sad to say, but we're going to have to be wrapping up soon. So I just want to leave you both with one final question. We've discussed the group's presence at UNGA and how we're going to be in New York advocating for Africans, young Africans, but also businesses from Africa trying to do trade and all of that. But I wanted to ask, why would you both say this should matter to the average person that's not attending UNGA, like the average Nigerian or African, with the backdrop of inflation and other macroeconomic variables that are occurring on the continent? Why should this matter to them, or why should this engagement be of importance?
Thanks, Oge. I think for us at the Tony Elumelu Foundation, we're very particular about expanding more partnerships to benefit more young African entrepreneurs. And at several occasions like UNGA, we've been able to announce landmark partnerships that has brought in investment, capital, and additional exposure for young Africans. Last year at UNGA, we announced two big partnerships. So one was with the United States government through the USADF, and that partnership was to support an additional over 500 young entrepreneurs on the continent. And so that's additional funding for these entrepreneurs, additional access to American markets, access to more mentors, access to additional technical capacity, trainings, etc. And this would not have been possible without us attending UNGA, speaking on behalf of young Africans, advocating and championing these young Africans, and demonstrating to the world why they deserve the spotlight and the visibility and the support. And so we announced these partnerships at UNGA, and we want to go back to UNGA to announce even more. This is funding that comes to these young entrepreneurs, funding that they need, especially, as you said, the inflation that's going through not just Nigeria, but many African countries, and the fact that it's much harder now to start a business across the continent than it was years ago. So if now more than ever, young entrepreneurs and young people need support. They need additional capital for their businesses. And that's why we must do all we can to not only attend these global convenings, but to ensure that we champion and speak in a very loud voice to advocate for these young Africans and support them in all the ways that we can.
Thank you. Over to you, Sola.
So for us at UBA, we do believe that our presence at UNGA is very, very important, because UNGA brings together the public sector, the private sector, and the development sector. And at UNGA, key decisions, are made based on various high-level conversations about key issues impacting the world. And Africa is a core part of that conversation. What is happening to Africa, helping Africa achieve the, sustainable development goals, helping Africa achieve its economic potential, and making sure the continent is not left behind. So it's really, really important. Now, and for us at UBA, we leverage UNGA to, one, network with key partners, both in public sector and the development sector. When I spoke earlier on, I highlighted the fact that UBA partners with a lot of development organizations, helping them to reach the last mile. What that means basically is they have the funding as part of their SDG objectives, right, for Africa, but they don't have the footprint. So they leverage partnerships with the likes of UBA to help them reach, very remote areas, in terms of, food security, in terms of, clean water, sanitation, potable water, education. So we're working with, as a partner, to various large NGOs and development organizations to reach the last mile, to improve the quality of life on the continent. We're also that voice that's also speaking to those key milestones that have been achieved on the continent in terms of not only the SDGs, but from economic perspective, why it makes sense to invest in Africa, invest in Nigeria, and the various countries where we operate. So through those investments, we're also able to catalyze achievement of the SDGs, because investments come with infrastructure, they come with, education, they come with job creation, and we're able to spotlight that. And we're also able to demonstrate how you can overcome the initial hurdles of doing business on the continent, leveraging our platform and being able to provide, support both from a financing and advisory capacity to institutions coming to do business in Africa. Yes, there's been a lot of inflation, but it's not unique to Africa. Across the world, the last 3, 4, 5 years, inflation has been totally, on the high side, but through cohesive, and very decisive steps that have been taken by the government, we're beginning to see a moderation. So if we use Nigeria as an example, in the months of July and August, you will see that there was an easing of inflation. So we've had 2 consecutive months where there has been a deceleration in inflation, which shows that the government is on the right track in terms of the interventions that it has made. And we're very, very optimistic that we can sustain this. We can also go back to lower inflation levels. And we're also very optimistic that a lot of the interventions that has been done across different sectors of the economy will begin to pay off. So for us, UNGA is really critical at having those type of conversation, seeking partners, reaching agreements, and beginning to plan for the next decade on how to improve the lot of the African population and how to achieve social impact on a mass scale. Thank you.
Thank you both very, very much. I really enjoyed having this conversation and recording this episode. And so that's all for today for our people listening. But please make sure to stay tuned for our next episode in our Conversations with 𝐂𝐤𝐿 series. Thank you both.
Thank you again.
Thank you again.
Nice
Thanks,
chatting with
Sola.
you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
This is Red Radio, powered by UBA, Africa's global bank.